Hi, my name is Lee Farmer and today we're going to talk about street photography. Now street photography seems to be one of those genres that strikes fear in the hearts of every single photographer. It doesn't have to, even if you come from landscape photography. We're going to go over some tips and tricks today that you can use to help you get into the genre and try it out for yourself. Not everybody has to be Bruce Gilden and stand 10 centimeters away from the subject's face. There are loads of ways you can get into street photography and enjoy street photography without having the confrontation of being right in someone's face. The old saying rings true that the best camera you have is the one that you have on you, or something of that nature. It's actually really true for street photography. I take about 90% of my street photos with my mobile phone. Now, this isn't because of some preference. The main reason is that I have my mobile phone on me all of the time, as does everybody else. And for the other, it's inconspicuous. Nobody really cares in this day and age if you have a mobile phone on you, or if you're waving around with a mobile phone. If I go out with my DSLR, which I'm shooting on now, then people can see me a mile off. One of the common misconceptions is that you should try and sneak around to get a photo, maybe around a corner, or have your camera down at your waist and sneak around. That is the easiest way for someone to spot you from 100 miles away. We have some kind of an ingrained thing in us as humans that we notice people that are creeping around. So don't try and creep around, just try and be normal and approach the subject, maybe take a picture, smile, ask them if they want to see the image. It's much better to engage with the person. You get a better result, and also the end exchange is less aggressive. Definitely 100%, if you're hiding around a corner with a zoom lens and you get spotted, you're going to get confronted. So don't do that. If you're using a film camera, it's the same as a DSLR or any other camera. There's no difference. Try not to focus on the gear as much. Just focus on the image itself and focus on walking around and getting used to taking those shots. My digital images I edit pretty much exclusively in Lightroom. If I do any edits at all, I try to get as much as possible in camera. But if I'm using my mobile phone, then I'll take it straight over to Snapseed, and then I will use one of the Snapseed edits, set up a border and put it straight out on my Instagram or save it. So try and keep it as simple as possible, and hopefully you'll get some good results. This is a very useful technique to stop you from aimlessly walking around and not knowing what images you're going to take. I've done this for the last 3 or 4 years and it helps me a lot. Basically what it is I usually set up 10 images that I want to take, and I use 2 of 2. So before I go out, I'll think I want to take images of shadows, for example. Then I want to take 2 images of 2 different types of shadows, and then I'll do 2 more whereby I'll take 2 images of somebody in a red coat, or a red coat and a red hat, or something of that nature. And then another 2 images whereby I want to take a picture of somebody walking hand in hand with somebody, maybe a close-up of someone's hands, close-up of feet, 2. Basically what this does is it takes your mind off going out and just aimlessly taking images. It gives you a goal, and it also helps you get into the flow. What I mean by the flow is it's a flow state you get into where you don't anymore think you're a person out with a camera taking images. You're just walking around. It gets into a feel, and the shot list helps a lot to get you started. And you can have the same shot list. You can change the shot list up. You can even adapt the shot list later on if you find that 2 shadows is getting boring. Then you can maybe change it up to add color, add placement, add positioning. You want to take 2 low shots of 2 people with shadows. You want to take 2 high shots of 2 people in red jackets that are creating 2 shadows that are crossing each other. There's no end to what you can do with a shot list. And you can leave the shot list after 15-20 minutes, or you can just do the whole day with a shot list. But have a plan when you go out, unless you're traveling from A to B and then you see something spontaneously, which is pretty much 99% of my images. I don't anymore go out and think I'm going to go out and take street photos now for 5-6 hours. It's usually when I'm A to B traveling somewhere or doing something else that I'll see something. But try a shot list out and see what you get. Trying to add different elements in the image, as well as landscape photography, also applies to street photography. If you're always taking pictures of the horizon with nothing in the middle or nothing behind, then the images get boring. It's the same as if you're taking street photos with a long lens of someone from behind, from 200 meters distance. It's boring. Try and use foreground objects. You can maybe try and get a juxtaposition whereby you take a close-up picture of a coffee mug and then you have someone walking across the brim of the coffee mug. You can use a fence to maybe frame a person in a different way. It's all about creating depth in the image, just like every other kind of photography. A lot of times when you see people are beginning with street photography, they'll walk up to someone and they'll take a shot and then everything will be in the image. Now that's good if you want to take that kind of image, but in the long run it gets boring and it gets a bit samey. Usually people will take images of older people because number one, they're less likely to discuss why you're taking an image, and also people take images from people from behind because they can't see them taking the shot. So if you cut away taking images of old people and cut away taking images of people's backs, already you've put yourself 80% higher than a lot of people who start off with street photography. And then try and use other things like shadows and reflections. A good thing to do is maybe shoot through a window of a shop and you have someone on the inside, not directly, but you just get a silhouette of the person with a different kind of a background. It's all about trying to find depth and layering in your images to make it more interesting and to make you stand out from the crowd. Because a lot of the time, street photography people do think that you have to get as close to the subject as humanly possible, or you have to take a picture of someone far away and get the whole street in. It's the same as every other kind of photography. If you're taking landscape photography and you have a nice sunset, it looks boring if you don't maybe have a nice tree in the foreground or a rock to something to reflect over. Or if you're going to take an image of a beach, the standard thing to do is pick up a camera and take a standard sort of landscape shot of the beach. But then you see other people maybe get down lower and take pictures of the sand in the foreground and have the beach in the background. It's the same thing with street photography. So try and get depth into your images. You can do it with anything. But a lot of the times fences and all sorts of trees and all sorts of things are good to try that with. Silhouettes on a sunny day can be great fun. What I would suggest you do is put the camera in manual mode, expose for the highlights wherever you are. Don't use a white building because it'll automatically try and scale it down to try and find the medium grey. So if you're going to take a picture of the highlights, maybe even take it up in the sky, it doesn't matter. But don't use a bright building because you're not going to get the right exposure. So take a picture, spot meter maybe for the highlights, and then leave that setting for the rest of the day. Now what you're going to find is, to get a successful silhouette, the subject has to be in shadow with the sun behind them. So a lot of it is the position of where you're taking the image, which will create or not create the silhouette. The best thing to do is, as we said before, put the camera in manual mode. Maybe if in the day you can maybe have ISO 100 if you're using a digital camera, and then maybe f8, f11, and then 250 shutter. That's probably going to get you a pretty decent exposure just for the highlights, and then keep it at that. Doesn't matter if you don't have any detail in the shadows, that's not the point. We're not trying to expose for a perfect image because then you wouldn't get the silhouette. What we want is zero shadow, and we want to try and focus on form. You can also, in this, when it's like this, you can stand at a certain point and you can just leave the camera facing a certain point and wait for someone to go past. You don't have to move the camera around. So you find a nice spot and you can maybe stay an hour and try and find a good silhouette. When we're taking silhouettes, it's also important to get some kind of distance and space. If your subject's walking, then try and wait for the person to be mid-stride, take the image. Wait for the person to move their hand, take the image. Otherwise you're just going to end up with a blob. But try it as much as you can, and don't be afraid to forget the shadows and just go for the highlights. You can always lift it up in post if you don't like it, but the complete black is the best thing you can get. And also, using those settings, try and take images of other things as well. Take images through a window, take images, as we did before, using juxtaposition, maybe take images using having something else in the foreground or something else in the background. You might be surprised at what you're going to get, because a lot of the time people try and find the image that's got the best shadows and the highlights are saved. What we're trying to do here is not expose perfectly the image. We're trying to find an interesting shot. So in a way, forget the normal rules of photography and make your own up. Realistic expectations. What do I mean by this? We live in Uppsala, Sweden. We don't live in New York, which means that we're not going to get the same images as the person who lives in New York. So if you want to go out and you're going to try and get images of high-rise buildings, hot dogs and amazing neon lights, you're not going to get that and you're going to be disappointed. So use what you have where you are. You also have to remember that the people who live in New York, street photography mecca, they look at pictures of Uppsala, Sweden. I get it quite often and say, wow, your trains are amazing, or your buildings are amazing, or the streets look amazing there. Don't get blind of where you live. So use what you have around you and try and create the best images that you have. Because somewhere somebody else is looking at that and wanting to come here and travel here and take the images that you're taking. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've been able to get some idea of some tips and tricks that you can use to help you get on your way. The main thing to do now is take your phone, camera, or whatever it is you're taking images with, get out on the streets, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to experiment with things either. No one's going to be a professional as soon as they go out with the camera. So have fun with it, that's the main thing. Go out and have fun and do things at your own pace and whatever you feel comfortable with.